So then I also want to talk about the existence of hierarchies and a natural hierarchy versus an unnatural hierarchy. And I mentioned that seeing difference, even sorting things because they're different, doesn't have to inherently be bad. And I think a very basic example of this, when a hierarchy or a system of prioritization might actually benefit us, is in our hierarchy of needs, right? So humans are hardwired to see difference. We literally couldn't survive life if we didn't notice difference and have pattern recognition, right? And also prioritizing things is also a part of survival. It's also a natural thing for humans to place greater priority on one thing over another. And so I use the example of we need oxygen more than we need toothpaste, right? We can survive without brushing our teeth. We might not want to not brush our teeth, but we can literally continue to live if we don't brush our teeth. We can live without teeth, but we can't live without oxygen. So if you're gonna give me one or the other, oxygen or toothpaste, I will take oxygen every time, right? Oxygen is more important, more valuable to me than toothpaste. Going a step further, brushing my teeth is more important to me than putting on makeup, or in my case, picking out my afro, right? I need to brush my teeth more than I need to wear lipstick or, do my hair, right? And so it's okay to have hierarchies in thinking about the natural world. But the problem is that throughout history, all of history, ancient history, current history, is that we were creating unnatural, oppressive social hierarchies, right? Social hierarchies like colorism, social hierarchies like sexism and racism and all the other classism even. They're not natural hierarchies. There's no biological need to place people into these hierarchies. And proof that a hierarchy based on race or color is unnatural is the ways that they've had to resort to violence and rape and genocide and political cheating, political fraud, and economic stealing, and coercive and trauma and psychological and emotional abuse, right? When you think about how much effort and investment it takes to maintain or try to enforce hierarchies based on color or race, we understand that it's not actually natural, right? Because if we were naturally sorting ourselves just because of the inherent or innate worth that we have, then you wouldn't have to result to redlining. You wouldn't have to resort to shackles and guns and, pillaging. And so these hierarchies are not natural, and they shouldn't be written off as like, oh, well, and I'm saying, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about a specific example. When I was in grad school, we were reading, a little bit about the colonial context of some of the Shakespeare plays that we were reading. And a white guy in my class, he said, well, it's their fault for being colonized. That's what this guy said, right? He was like, oh, well, it's their fault for being colonized. If they were strong enough or if they cared enough, they would have fought back and they would have won, right? And so he's saying that, what we call survival of the fittest or quote unquote natural selection, right? That was his argument. But my argument is that if I'm really inferior to you, then you wouldn't have to have Jim Crow segregation. You wouldn't have to refuse me or deny me the right to learn how to read. You wouldn't have to lynch me for trying to vote, right? And so the fact that colonial powers have had to resort to so much violence is indicative of the fact that it's not true. It's not an actual natural social hierarchy that we are inferior. Because if I was naturally inferior, you wouldn't have to do anything for me to be marginalized, right? And the fact that you're fighting so hard to keep me marginalized proves that it's not naturally meant to be that way. So that's an argument that I want to make there. Something I say very often is that race is a social construct. People will always reshape and shapeshift racial identity and shapeshift racial categories to fit their purposes, to suit their agenda, right? And so one, I would say, what's the person who's saying that? What's their agenda? What do they have to gain from framing race in that way? What is the benefit to them for defining racial identity the way that they do? Because race as an idea only came about to suit the purposes and the agenda, the capitalist agenda, the white supremacist patriarchal agenda of a select few people. And so as we are engaging in that dynamic, we also have to be asking ourselves that question as well. Like, to what ends am I trying to define race in this way? Diane Jones says, how is skin bleaching any different from tanning your skin or any other changes? So one, skin bleaching has existed a lot longer than tanning as a practice. Tanning has only existed for a couple of decades, whereas skin bleaching has existed for centuries. So it's a blip on the radar in terms of the legacy of skin bleaching and skin whitening practices. But secondly, tanning is not the same as skin bleaching because people who want to tan are not socially marginalized if they don't tan. Tanning is not a way to move up the socioeconomic opportunity ladder. But people who bleach their skin very much believe and perceive, and with ample evidence, they're doing that so that they have greater socioeconomic, political opportunities so that they can stand a better chance of getting a job or finding a mate, right? Whereas tanning is still sort of a cosmetic or fad, or it's more trendy. But for people who bleach their skin, for people who practice skin bleaching, for them, it's a matter of, am I actually going to be able to achieve life goals? Am I actually going to be able to be treated fairly? Am I going to be able to avoid systemic discrimination and systemic marginalization by being lighter skinned?